study tips. So one of the reasons why I kind of incorporate this all together is so that you can use your learning style or your preferred learning style as a way to help you with your study. So why do we consider learning styles? It's to acknowledge that people learn in different ways. So there are lots of different ways that people learn, and we tend to use all the different learning styles at different times. So seeing, hearing, and or doing are learning styles. So seeing, visual learners, hearing, auditory learners, and doing is tactile or kinesthetic learners. Usually everybody has one of these learning styles that's developed more than all the others. And so if we adjust our study skills to fit our personal learning styles, we tend to perform better. So visual learners tend to learn best when information is presented in written form or visually through diagrams and pictures. So visual learners tend to learn best if they take notes, when they look at notes, have outlines, look at diagrams and charts. For a lot of visual learners, mind mapping is a great strategy. It helps reinforce your learning with pictures. And often people who are visual learners, if they do mind mapping or they're looking at diagrams, what happens is when it's time to recall the information, they can kind of pull that information into their mind that was in the diagram more so than if it were just a bulleted list of information. Flashcards with limited information is another great study tip for people who are visual learners. Highlighting or underlining important information. Also another really important way for visual learners to take in the information they need. So most of your classes that you're going to be attending, you're going to have your virtual classroom, but most of your instructors are also going to provide PowerPoints. There's a way that you can print off your PowerPoint, so there's 3 to a slide, and there's a section on the side where you can write some notes as you're going through the class. Underline important stuff in your PowerPoint and highlight things. I also tell students to do that with their textbooks. Don't be afraid to mark on your textbooks if this is a way that's going to help you learn, because in the end, that's why you're here. It's to learn the information and be able to go out and do it. So don't worry about writing on your textbooks. A lot of students will look for used textbooks that already have notes in them. So it tends to not be a deterrent when it comes, if you decide that you're going to sell your textbooks at a later date. Make outlines of the material and show connections. Another great way for you to, sorry, I have a pop-up and it's distracting. Another great way for you to make connections when you're learning material, especially for the first time or if you're reviewing at the end. Make notes, write down keywords and concepts during lectures. That way you can look them up again later after the lecture is finished. Rewriting notes after class is helpful. It's also a second repetition of the material, which helps move information from short-term memory to long-term memory. Visualize the material as you hear it spoken. Read the material in the textbook before the lecture. That way you're familiar with the material that's going to be coming up. And if there's anything that you really didn't understand the first time, because you're not expected to teach it to yourself, but at least you're familiar with it. So it makes, when you're going into the lecture, it makes it so that there are no surprises, so to speak. Use color coding when studying new information. I always tell students if they're going to do that, make sure that if you have a color coding system, it's one that you're going to be able to stick with. So if color coding works for you, that is fantastic. But if you're a student where the coming up with a color coding system, trying to stick to the color coding system is going to take more time and energy than going through the information, don't use a color coding system. Use models if they're available, quiet rooms with few distractions, and that was also discussed earlier in one of the sessions. Studying on your own, and have a clean environment, so free from distractions and clutter. All tend to be really, really good tips for visual learners. And I didn't say at the very beginning of the presentation is certainly raise your hand, ask questions if you want to during the presentation. The other thing is I always break all the rules for PowerPoint slides. I have all this information written down, and in the slide, and it's so that when we send it out, you have it. You don't need to try to take a lot of notes while you're listening to this particular session. All the information should be in the PowerPoint for the most part. Auditory learners. So auditory learners are those who learn best through hearing. They like to listen, and it's their preferred mode for collecting and processing data. So for a lot of auditory learners, they tend to be the students that hate to miss the classroom time, or hate to miss a class because they find they learn the information best when they're sitting right there, they hear the instructor, and they hear all the discussion that's happening in the classroom. So they attend classes, tutorials, and discussions. If you're an auditory learner, that tends to be the best way for you to learn. It's also, those are the students that do best in study groups. So studying with friends to talk about the information and discuss your ideas verbally. Auditory learners also like to listen, speak, explain, describe. They like debates sometimes, and show and tell. Those are all ways that they get the information in an auditory mode that's helpful for them to learn the information and retain it. For auditory learners, read your books, your articles or your notes, directions, read them out loud, because you are hearing your own voice. And while at first it might feel a little bit strange, even hearing your own voice will help you retain the information more. Tape recording lectures rather than taking written notes. So that's one that I did not. I had adjusted this and fixed some of the language. Nobody tape records anything anymore. It's all digital recordings or recording apps. Again, with Virtual Classroom, everything is recorded now, but there are other tools available for students. There are recording apps on your phone. Students can get smart pens with specialized paper where you write down your notes, and you can tap on the part of your note where you want to hear, and it will just play back from that point forward. So those are some great tools. If you are audio recording lectures, you do need to connect with your learning strategist and sign an audio recording agreement. It's the only thing at MBCC. Doing oral reports whenever possible, that can be something that can be discussed if it's a need. Dictating written assignments into a digital voice recorder, a recording app, or possibly having someone who's willing to scribe for you so that you're getting your thoughts out and somebody else is writing it down. Or you can use Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a recording app. And there are other speech to text tools available. Listening to audiobooks, using a digital voice recorder to keep track of assignments and projects so that you play it back at the end. I know I used to travel a lot at all the different campuses in one of my other roles, and I had a digital voice recorder, and I would before that, I would even, when I had Bluetooth, I would call myself and leave myself voice messages on so that I could create a to-do list once I got home or back to the office, so I wouldn't lose those thoughts or that to-do list. Some students find that if they create musical jingles or mnemonics, it helps aid their memory, repeating vocabularies and definitions out loud. I will say to students, if that's something that helps, even if they record it themselves, or if they have somebody that pairs with them and they do it together, whatever they think might be helpful. Creating flashcards, use them to play your own version of Jeopardy. That can be a lot of fun and can help really reinforce learning. And auditory learners may need to experiment with the best study location, as some learn best in silence, other than their own voice or their study partner's voice, or they may need music playing in the background. So that's really a personal preference. There is no set, this is the perfect music to use. What I often will say to students is, if you're playing music while studying, if it's not a distraction and you don't think it's interfering with your study, then use it. If it becomes a distraction, if all of a sudden instead of studying you're singing along to whatever songs you have playing, or if you find that you get lost in the music versus studying, then it's time to switch to something else. So again, that's really personal preference. Kinesthetic and tactile learners. So these are the learners who like to learn by doing things or experiencing things. So they often need to touch, feel, and be more active physically in their learning. So these are the learners that always kind of describe themselves as hands-on learners. So if you're a kinesthetic or a tactile learner, study information by placing facts on index cards and reading the information aloud while pacing or walking around. That's really important. It helps you get out any excess energy if you happen to have it, but it also allows you to be physically moving while you're engaged with the material that you're trying to learn. And sometimes when it's theory material or it's not a hands-on component of your of the program that you're in, this is another way to be busy or to be engaged in it. When you're in class, if it's necessary to be still, these are the types of learners that tend to bounce their foot, they twirl a pen, they squeeze a ball. It's also the learners that are clicking their pens. So it's really important to realize if you're a kinesthetic or tactile learner and you tend to do those types of things, try not to be distracting to those around you and find ways that you can move while you're learning without distracting those around you. I've also recommended to students that they twirl a rubber band between their fingers if they don't want to take notes or they feel they don't need to take notes to keep their hands busy. They might have a fidget ring, so a ring with a spinner or a spinner ring. All those things that can kind of keep you engaged in the material, that can help keep you engaged in the material. Some students that are tactile learners like to doodle or color. Again, if this is something that helps you and doesn't distract from what you're supposed to be paying attention to, that's great. In some programs, especially PN, PSW, there are a couple of books where you can get coloring books and stuff to help with the material you're learning, especially in anatomy and physiology. So this would be a great resource to use as well. Setting a timer for 20 to 30 minutes also helps work. So if you can work for that amount of time, then you take a 5 to 10 minute break. This is a study tip that we recommend to almost everybody. We call it chunking up your work. You set a timer for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You study what you need to study or what you've decided you're going to study at that time, and then you take a 5 to 10 minute break. It helps your mind reset. So it gives your mind a break. For some tactile learners, using brightly colored paper and worksheets helps them focus. Writing vocabulary words on paper with glue. This is more for younger learners, sprinkling sand or glitter on top. It's to get them actively engaged with the material and make it fun, and then they tend to remember it more. But for more mature learners studying for tests, if you trace the words with your eyes closed, sometimes that seems to help. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do that with every single thing, so it might be that you reserve that for things that you're having particular difficulty with. For some students, they find that if they're pedaling on a stationary bike or climbing on a Stairmaster or using a treadmill while they're studying, it helps them move and be engaged in the material. Again, don't do those things if it becomes a huge distraction instead of a help. Working through problems physically, if available, using models and machines if they're available, studying in short blocks. So again, setting up your timer for a block that makes sense for you. Some kinesthetic learners like role playing, so they will role play if they can. They find that it helps cement the information. Studying with others, taking field trips or visiting museums, that's great if you can. Right now during COVID, that's not something that we can really do a whole lot of, and it's not always applicable, but for some tactile kinesthetic learners, a lot of the instructors have wonderful additional information posted on Brightspace where you can find video clips on campus. If you're on campus, there could be models of the stuff that you're learning or that you're working on at the time. So use those when you have the opportunity, using memory games so that you're more actively engaged, and using flashcards to memorize. So again, when you're using those types of techniques, don't just read it and flip it over and read it and put it to the side. That's kind of a passive way to learn. What you really want to do is be actively engaged with whatever material it is that you have to read or that you're learning. So you want to read it, you want to quiz yourself on it, you want to say the answer out loud, you want to maybe ask other people to ask you for stuff. That's where flashcards are really, really good at times as well. Just notes.
Jody, can I add a funny story into this?
Absolutely.
So I have an 8-year-old daughter, and last week she was supposed to memorize all of the provinces in French, provinces and territories. And I spent, oh, we've got somebody with a mic on. Hang on.
Yeah.
Got
it. I got it.
Okay, perfect. So I spent 3 days working with her, trying to teach her how to say the provinces in French and how to read them and what order they went in. And I really wasn't getting anywhere. And then my husband said, you know what, I got this. Let me give it a try. And he had her stand at one end of the house with the map, and he'd say, run to the stairs, come all the way back, and what's this one? And she would say it. And he'd say, great, now run to the stairs, come back, what's this one? And she would say it. And I swear in half an hour, she had them all memorized. She did her test the next day and got a perfect mark. And I would never have thought of it. But it was amazing just to add that running in there. And I thought, okay, now we know she's a kinesthetic learner. Perfect. So it really does work.
It does. And the other thing too is because while you're thinking about it, you're kind of cementing that information, because as you're running, you're thinking about what, for her, she's probably thinking what she has to do, right? So even though some of the stuff we recommend at times sounds silly, or you feel you're going to feel ridiculous doing it, try it anyway, because at the end of the day, you're here to learn and go out and be practice in the fields that you've chosen. So don't set up roadblocks that don't need to be there. Try it. If it doesn't work, throw it away. It's as easy as that, right? So more tips: develop acronyms. SCUBA, HOMES, are all acronyms to help people memorize different things. So HOMES is the acronym for the Great Lakes: Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, Lake Superior. Study in time chunks: 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 30 minutes, a 10-minute break. I wouldn't recommend a 50-minute study, even though it's right here in my tips. I have to update this. I would say more 30. And what I tell students is think about chunking up your studying the same way. So think of your mind as a muscle, or your brain as a muscle. If you were running a marathon, you would at times have to either do slow and steady, or you would have to take some breaks where you do a little bit of walking throughout. So if you look at that, your mind, the same way that you look at your legs, once your legs get fatigued, they don't work as well. By studying in chunks of time, 20, 25 minutes with a 5 to 10-minute break, what you're doing is you're giving your mind a chance to kind of bounce back. The other thing too is that there's lots of studies that show that when we study and we have concentrated focus, we tend to remember what we were studying at the very beginning, like at the beginning and at the end, and the stuff in the middle kind of gets fuzzy for us. So if your study break is a shorter amount of time, then there's less stuff that's going to get fuzzy that you're going to have to go back and reread or restudy later. And ideally, if you can do it, study different subjects in each time chunk. Can't always do that though, and that's okay. Even if you're taking those breaks and you're doing something else and then coming back and you're engaged, that's great. More tips: use your agenda, a calendar. This helps you track your time or manage your time. So in this particular clip, it says, once again, you forgot about another big test, and here we are at the last minute helping you cram. So by managing your time, by putting stuff in your agenda and your calendar, one, it will help you stay organized so you don't get those unpleasant surprises that you forgot about an assignment or you forgot about a test or a quiz. Two, if you use your agenda or your calendar to help chunk up your time so you kind of set deadlines for yourself of when things have to happen, it becomes a very visual representation for visual learners. For auditory learners, you can look at it, you can read the assignment dates and due dates out loud. You get the idea. For kinesthetic learners, they can also do that as well. And then I'm not sure what time we're supposed to be finishing today, Jacqueline. Is it, Rachel, is it at 11 or before? Do you know? Doesn't matter. I have some top 10 test taking tips. So 10 class.
Sorry.
10:50. So we have time. Yeah. A 10 class, you're going to get lots of information. You're going to hear the information from your instructors. You're going to hear all of the discussion that's happening. You're going to be able to hear or see any questions that are coming up in the virtual classroom. So that's the best way to kind of get that information and hear it and interact with it. Review daily. So at the end of the day, put aside time to review what you went over in your virtual classrooms that evening. So a lot of studies show that it takes 5 repetitions of material to move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. So if you're reading your material before you go into class, then you're at the lecture, and then at the end of the day, you're able to review that material again, maybe beef up your notes a little bit. That's 3 repetitions of that material. So then between when you learn it and when the test comes, as long as you review it 2 more times so that it's chunked up, it should really help with your retention and help when it comes time to write your test. So even though it sounds like a lot of work up front, it's going to work a lot better than if you're chunking, or not chunking, but cramming before big tests or assignments. And it's information, you're going to retain that information more, so you're not going to lose it once the test is done. Mark your textbooks and PowerPoints, mentioned that before. Study with a peer. Predict test questions. So if you are preparing for a test and you're really not sure, like what information is important, how am I going to be tested on that? When you're going through the material, what information is important? What did the instructor talk about? What did they point you to in your textbook? What kind of questions can they create based on that information? And if the instructor has given you some tips about whether or not it's going to be a multiple choice or a short answer or a long answer, you can kind of tweak the types of questions based on that information as well. So again, a study according to the test type. If it's multiple choice, there's some cueing usually, or some information usually in your 4 different choices or 5 or 3 choices through the multiple choice. That's going to help you figuring out the answer. But if you have to do short answer, long answer, there's nothing there to cue your memory. So you have to learn and memorize that material a little bit differently. Use your review tools, whatever it is that works for you. The day of the test, give yourself plenty of time to arrive. There's nothing worse than sleeping in or leaving late, arriving, and being panicked about getting to the class on time. Or in the case of virtual testing, logging in and having a computer issue and not being able to start your test at the time that it opens up. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time, have your laptop set up, try to have a good breakfast or something to eat so that when you start the test or before you start the test, you're nice and calm, or as calm as you can be, and you haven't created any that are going to cause you panic, anxiety, or worry, because you bring those into the test with you. So take a moment and organize and collect your thoughts before you start. Oh, we have a question. Is anyone else having issues with the audio breaking up? Is everybody able to hear okay for the most part? We're almost at the end, so hopefully that hasn't been a problem throughout.
I haven't had any issues.
Good. So when you first go in to write your test, do something called like a memory dump. You call it a lot of different other things, but if you have asked for permission, if you're in the classroom, to bring in some blank paper, if you're doing a bright space test where there's lockdown, as long as you have paper in it and that's blank, you can use that. And write down the key things that you're afraid you're going to forget. So that way, if there's things that you're afraid you're going to forget or you're not sure, just jot them down in point form. If there are acronyms you've been taught, if there are, you have to list 4 things. If there are those types of things you think, oh my goodness, I'm really, really going to forget this once I start reading them, I think I'm going to panic. Write them down ahead of time. It only takes a couple of minutes to do that. And then budget your time during your test. So what we often will tell students is to go through. Some people like to read the test all the way through before they begin anything. If you have the time for that, that is wonderful. Another thing you can do is to go through, do all the questions that you know or you feel that you know well first, and then go back and do the rest of the questions. And kind of take note of what questions are worth. So what's the value on a question? So if you're struggling with one question and you spend 5 minutes trying to answer it or 10 minutes trying to answer it and it's only worth 1 point, and then you get to another question that's worth 4 points or 5 points, perhaps that time should have been spent on that question because it's worth more points in the end. So you'll have to judge that going in yourself, but it's a nice thing to keep in mind when you're trying to track. And I will often tell students, especially with virtual testing, to set a timer so that when they know so that you know at what point your test is almost done. So for some students, they want to know when they only have 15 minutes left. Other students want to know when they have half an hour left. Set a little timer that goes off so that you don't constantly have to check your time on the screen. Sometimes for students that will cause anxiety. So I have thrown a lot of information at you guys. Does anybody have any questions? Quiet group. Did anybody have anything they wanted to add?
Thank you, Jody. That was a lot of good information.
It was a lot of information.
I just put in the chat, we are recording this, so if anyone, there's been a few people that have gotten bumped off and come back in or had some issues with the audio. This is all recorded so that you can see it again, and this is a good practice, I guess, for what virtual classrooms are like. Those things do happen, and most instructors are recording their sessions so that if that happens to you during class, you can watch the recording after.
Right. And I guess one of the other tips I would give too is that if you try something and it's new, if it's a new practice or a new way that you're going to do something, try it for a week or 2 weeks, depending. Because it takes a while for new practices to become routine or to become comfortable. So if you try it for the first couple times, like reading stuff out loud to yourself and you hate it, try it for a little bit longer. It's not giving you a whole lot of extra, it's not adding extra time to your study. And in the end, it might be helping. So there's some stuff that I certainly recommend to students that they continue to do, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable, as long as it's not having a huge negative impact on their studying. Because as it becomes more comfortable or second nature, it often becomes a tip that's really, really good or that's really useful. And as I had mentioned earlier, all the learning strategists are able to do learning study styles, study tips, learning styles. So if you are having difficulty throughout, once your classes start, you're having some difficulty, reach out to your learning strategist. Say that you would like some help with study tips. And I won't speak for all of my colleagues, but I know that when I work with students, I will often ask them, what have you been doing? Like, how do you presently study? And I'll ask them some pretty specific questions. And then we go from there. It's not that we're going to throw out everything you've been doing. It's to see what have you been doing, what works, and what can we tweak? So that maybe there's a couple of things we can recommend that you start trying that helps increase the amount that you're retaining, maybe decreases the amount of study time you have. For a lot of students, they say, I'm studying differently, so the amount of time I'm studying has stayed the same or it's gone down a little bit, but I find that I'm retaining the information more, so I'm much happier with the results that I'm getting. So reach out to us. We're here to help. All right.